countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, it is now time for more of the Last Comic Shop podcast.
That is right. We are opening up the shop to newbies to help them find their way underneath this comic book tent and hopefully avoid all those supervillains.
That's right. We're keeping the lights on for the oldies who love those supervillains. So much so, they were excited to discover the supervillains got their own book back in the 70s.
That's right, Chad. Teaming up for superheroes to team up. What would happen if supervillains teamed up? And we'll get into the supervillain team up in just a second. I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson. I'm joined by Chad Smith, who I just shouted out, as well as J.A. Scott, my wonderful other co-host. But we are going to be welcoming a brand new guest here in 2025, Dr. Gordan Schmidt. That's right. He's a doctor. He writes books about leadership and things, right, Gordan?
Yes. Excited to be here in 2025. What I do is I write about leadership in a bunch of different ways, but one of it is through popular culture as outreach of leadership ideas. So how do we make leadership understandable to people? Research is often boring and hard to read, but people actually like Marvel movies and Avatar: The Last Airbender, and so when we talk about them, people are more interested in the topic. So that's kind of the impetus of...
I don't know if they were as fond of the Avatar: The Last Airbender movies, though. At least that one.
I cannot recollect any live-action movie happening. But what we think about leadership the most is not just leaders as a person, but as leadership as a process of influence. So it's all about influencing other people, changing their attitudes, their behaviors, helping them to do something they wouldn't have done otherwise. And so we talk a lot about leadership as that process of influence versus particular people doing it. Now, of course, we look at that through the movies, and there's a lot of different types of leaders in that.
So we know the big ones. You got your Captain Americas and your Iron Man. But what are some leaders that from the MCU that people might not expect? Please say Paul Rudd.
I think Paul Rudd is a pretty good leader. Paul has these relationships with people. Scott Lang has these relationships, not literally. Paul Rudd's not playing himself in the movie, as far as I know. I could be wrong.
I don't know. That second movie was a Paul Rudd showcase.
Yeah, absolutely. But they know each other's skills. They know how to work together well. They've got that existing relationship. And so they're able to accomplish a lot of that stuff in the film because of their work together. So, yeah, I think Ant-Man, Scott Lang, is a good leader. I think Star-Lord is a very interesting leader in the movies because the Guardians are not a team you can just direct, right?
Right.
Iron Man could tell them what to do, and they'd say, go screw, right? They're individual, powerful people that have their own perspectives. But with the Guardians, it's a very much more of a shared leadership type situation. Peter leads at times, but Rocket helps when we're breaking out of prison. Other people have expertise in other areas. And so we kind of got a flow of when somebody's leading or not within that team of the Guardians, which I think is a nice way to look at that. You've got different people being leaders in different situations, which honestly is kind of what we see in real life, right? Is that you might have somebody who's got the title of a boss, but sometimes they have very little control. Sometimes they have very little influence. It might be a senior worker who really knows what's going on, or just somebody who helps to make sure things happen. I feel like in a lot of offices, you have an administrative assistant that really is the only way anything gets done, right?
Absolutely.
And that's leadership.
The shadow boss. They pulled the strings.
Yeah. The shadow boss makes it sound bad, right? But it also is literally like you have people that have a lot of impact that we don't look at that type of way. And that's administrative, assistants, coordinators. They're big on informational power. They often know how things work. And like I'm in a university, it's a very bureaucratic system. You need to know the right person. Yeah. Yes. You need the person who knows the rules, knows where the paperwork is, knows where that stuff is. And that's as important. Superheroes don't do that as much. They're much more likely to sort of bend the rules or break them in what they're doing. But a lot of times in our day-to-day, we can't do that in the same way. Of course, it doesn't work. We've got to keep working in that system.
So to wrap up the leadership convo, who's one last leader from the MCU that you think doesn't get the attention they might otherwise deserve.
I think it's interesting thinking about, somebody like Loki, right?
Okay.
And kind of his struggle related to leadership because people don't trust him for good reasons, right? And that's kind of the whole, Loki season 1 is really about how can we trust this dude? Obviously, he's up to no good. And so him and Mobius together kind of building a relationship to kind of trust each other, even when there's, is the organization I work for good or not? And we kind of see interesting aspects of that in season 2. And we actually write about this a little bit in the blog, is Loki kind of goes all in as if he's a TVA agent following the rules. And it goes really bad. They don't really resolve any of the things they need until the end of the season. He remembers, I am a god. I am a trickster. This is how we do it, right? He's too focused on his role of being, a good TVA person following the rules and being a hero when that's not who he is in that same way. And so I think it's an interesting path that he has. He gains the respect of others to some degree over time and might become a leader, but he gets himself too constrained in this situation versus how are we really going to resolve this situation, right? Just seeing him fail over and over again is really interesting because, we as fans might say, why did he not do this or that? And you're like, well, because he's not thinking about it correctly of how do you resolve this situation. So
that's awesome. And so the last thing before we shift gears, I'll just say, if people wanted to find out more about your work with the MCU leadership or the Avatar leadership, where can they go to get that stuff? You mentioned your blog. You mentioned the books.
Sure.
Give us more deets.
Yeah. So we, my co-author Sai Islam, we blog at his consulting website, talentmetrics.io. And so a lot of times we'll just watch a pop culture thing and then write about it. You'll see something like the most recent Indiana Jones movies. There's a mentorship thing going on here. It really shows the struggle of mentorship, or, talking about the Barbie movie and work motivation. We talk about a lot of stuff where you're like, I wouldn't have thought of that. But it makes sense when you kind of the blog. So I definitely recommend checking that out. The Marvel book, Leaders Assemble, Leadership in the MCU, is available on Amazon. And then Elements of Leadership, Lessons from Avatar, The Last Airbender, is also up on Amazon. And I am, at least currently, I'm still on X right now with @IO Psychology. And I don't know, you don't get recommended a lot, but feel free to add me on LinkedIn, Gordan Schmidt. I do post about this type of stuff. We'll probably end up sharing a link to to this podcast on LinkedIn. So if you start to get blown up from LinkedIn, it's because Sai and I are sharing this link around. So
that's awesome. Yeah, that's a whole different avenue. We've messed up all kinds of other social sites. We haven't done any damage on LinkedIn yet.
Figure out how to break it sooner or later.
So let's go ahead and shift gears real quick away from leadership and that kind of talk. One thing that we always like to do on the Last Comic Shop is talk about your comic book journey. Obviously, you're more than just somebody that talks about leadership. You're more than just a doctor at a university. You're a comic book fan. And we here at the Last Comic Shop love comic book fans. So the question I ask everybody is, do you remember the first comic book that you got? Or if you don't remember the exact comic book, the first one that really made an impact, the one that you're like, oh gosh, that was the one. There was something magical about it. It just made me want to read comics after that.
Oh, sure. My dad growing up was big on comic books, but he was big on war comics and horror and stuff like that.
So he was all into the Joe Kubert stuff?
Yeah, a lot of the DC stuff, Our Army at War, Sergeant Rock, GI Combat, and Davy Crockett. The greatest
King of the Wild Frontier.
And so I'm sure I read some of that stuff. In terms of my own kind of what really affected me the most, G.I. Joe issue 47 is one of the first issues I ever got of a comic.
Okay.
Help me out, because that's the Mike Zeck era covers, but I can't place 47 specifically.
So 47 has them in a boat. It's got Hawk, it's got a wetsuit. Oh, and Beachhead is in it, and they're kind of all shooting forward. It's an awesome cover.
Oh, nice.
And it always is weird for me with G.I. Joe because people talk about the TV show, but my life was that comic book. I think of G.I. Joe, I think of Larry Hama, I think of that. And so, if I watch the TV show, I'm like, this is kind of for children.
Yeah.
Like, I was reading like real things written by like a vet about war. That's the comic. It's just so much realistic in a lot more ways.
It sounds like, your dad was into the war comics and the sci-fi comics. Then you got in kind of sort of through licensed comics, because that's often a gateway that a lot of folks get into comic books, is through the licensed properties. So where did you go from there?
My dad always used to be going to flea markets and buying stuff to flip for money at the garage sale. He had all these things he'd be buying for that type of goal. The garage sale was like the most important thing for me as a kid of my life was that. And so he'd go to flea markets to go to this. And so at this flea market in, I think his 4th grade, a guy had a big box of comic books for $50. And so my dad buys these comics to be like, we're going to make money on them at the garage sale, right? But I can read them, sell them, right? And so that is where I read my first Spider-Man comics and my first Avenger comics. Avengers 151 was one of the ones in there. A great book about, the team being built and put together type stuff, which I always think
the assemble issues. Those are great.
Yeah, those are just awesome. I always think the Avengers are a team where you just have these big press conferences about who's going to be on the team, which is true, but the degree to which it happens is not nearly as much as I thought as a child. Because my first issue was about, who's going to be on this team, who's in and who's out.
Right.
There weren't any X-Men comics in there, and it really kind of set me on the path of Spider-Man and Avengers are the superheroes that I like. The interesting thing with that is, as I buy more comics nowadays, even I remember, that was in that box. So that box had the Eternals were in there. I didn't like it that much, but I read Kirby through the Eternals, right? And even, the book we're going to read today, 2 issues of Supervillain Team Up were in there. Issues 12 and issue 14, and that's how I read them.
Wow. So so that box is your vault. That is your vault. That is your magic vault. And that's really what we love on this show. When people, they get that gleam in their eye, they start talking about, it's just a part of their subconscious when it comes to comic books, that these were the books that really define me. So that is awesome, Gordan. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. And you know what? Let's get into Supervillain Team Up, those 2 issues, as well as a couple others, right after this commercial break. So stay tuned for more of The Last Comic Shop. We've got a slew of great late Bronze Age books to talk about right after this.
BCWSupplies.com has everything a comic collector could need. Boards, bags, long boxes, and so much else for our ever so increasing collections. And you can save 10% on your total order by using promo code LCSPOD at checkout. Not only does this take 10% off BCW Supplies' already low prices, but it supports my favorite podcast, The Last Comic Shop. So get all your collecting gear at bcwsupplies.com and save 10% on your order with promo code LCSPOD at checkout. That's LCSPOD at checkout. Happy hunting!
Dave.
Liam.
It's a trailer.
Watch It If You Can podcast. Join us for each episode as we create box sets of our favourite films and TV shows.
We go through the cast to see what else they've been in, along with any recommendations.
We pick our favourite characters, performances, moments and highlights from the soundtrack too.
We ask if there's anything to make it better and look at the lasting legacy of our pick.
We have a little fun with our quickfire round, and finally, what else would you like list based on themes from the episode.
Maybe, just maybe, you should watch it if you can.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for our Read Pile Review. Yes, that time of every single show where we have guests on and they pick books that I like. That's right. Hey, Gordan, I'm so happy that you picked these Supervillain Team Up issues. To be very blunt, again, Bronze Age, as anybody knows, is my jam. I love Bronze Age comics. They're my favorite era of comic books. It's a little bit less childlike than the Silver Age, but at the same time, it's not as dark and gritty as something that you would get in the late 80s and then into the 90s. Like, there's still a charm about it. There's still a naivete about it. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's still written for anybody. Like, that's the best thing about Bronze Age comics. You can hand it to anybody. Somebody that's 8 years old, somebody that's 80 years old. Yeah, it's just a story. Mostly melodrama. It's all good. And we got that in spades. Plus Dr. Doom. This is great. So, Chad, we're reading what issues of Supervillain Team Up today?
Okay, so we are doing Supervillain Team Up issues 10 through 14. Story continued in the Champion 16. So, circa 1977. You got that Bronze Age storytelling from primarily Bill Mantlo with Bob Hall and Don Perlin on penciling and inking duties. But you do get appearances from Keith Giffen in issue 13. You get some inking help by Duffy Boland in issue 16 of the Champions. And then each issue gets a different letterer and a couple of different colors. So we had Denise Wall on lettering, I Watanabe, Tom Ors, Bruce Patterson, Irv W., and D. Wall all do letters across the various issues. And then Don Warfield colors issues 10 and 11, 13 and 14. And then George Rousseau chips in and colors issue 12. And for Champion 16, it was Phil Raish on color.
Yeah, but you're not selling it, Chad. You're not selling the most important issue in this whole bunch. That cover of issue 14, right? That cover, when the Book of Doom omnibus came out, I had to get that as the cover because I was just like, no way. That cover by John Byrne of Doom standing in the middle of all the Avengers and they're all bowing down to him. Doom Supreme. Oh, still one of the most badass Doom pictures ever. Man, blow that sucker up. Put it on the wall. That's my boy. That's my tin-plated boy right there. But J.A., what happens in these what, six something issues of Supervillain Team-Ups into Champions?
Yes, and you say that you can hand Bronze Age books to anyone, but guarantee you hand it to a child and you're going to be inundated with questions for the next 2 days on this thing because it is crazy. Anyways, it starts out that the Red Skull has taken over Doom's country of Latveria by doing something very 1980s. He's bought up Doom technology and then reverse engineered it so that he could figure out how to get inside Doom's lair and make all the stuff work for himself. And then he's got this giant space laser because it's the 70s and you have to have a space laser. Doom doesn't like this, so he teams up with Captain America to try to defeat the Red Skull. Namor shows up because he's mad at Doom for not fulfilling his promise. At some point, Doom and Captain America get shrunk down to the size of 6-inch action figures and run around for a couple of pages and overcome a snake.
You're getting lost in the subplots.
Garden snake. This starts out, there's a duplicate Doom that's not really Doom, but he's trying to fight to overthrow Doom because Doom is running Latveria badly. But then once he's defeated, cries out for Doom to help him because he realizes how much he loves Doom. There's a real love-hate relationship with the people of Latveria. They defeat the Red Skull. Doom then goes to fulfill his promise to Namor to unfreeze all the people of Atlantis that have been frozen by this nerve toxin that fell off a transport ship and froze everybody in suspended animation. There's this giant fight between Namor and Krang, who's a blue guy that kind of looks like Genghis Khan. And
not
then
Krang.
Not Kang. Krang, yes.
But not the Ninja Turtle guy.
Oh, and then Doom decides he's been chemtrailing the Earth, and we've been breathing this all in, and so now he can send out some sort of radio wavelength or something, and he controls everyone. Namor decides he doesn't have to fight back because it doesn't affect anyone in the sea, so goodbye. Yep, I don't care. Not the Avengers, but a group of very Avenger-like superheroes called the Champions, who is basically the Avengers plus Iceman and Angel, get together to fight Doom, and and Magneto shows up, and Magneto's fighting Doom.
We've lost Magneto. He was crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the 10-cent synopsis. It's
Right.
crazy.
No, look, at the end of the day, there is a story that's very similar to this. And so, I'm not even going to save this for recommendations. Later on, there was another story called Emperor Doom, which kind of does the same storyline a little bit better. It's really, in essence, Doom has a way of taking over the minds of everybody on Earth, right? In Emperor Doom, he uses the Purple Man instead of some weird chemical gas that nobody can see. But long story short, this is another example of how Doom really doesn't want to take over the world. He just wants the challenge of taking over the world. He just wants the chase. He's like one of those guys, oh, I want that action figure. Oh, I want that action figure. Oh, and you go all over the world looking for this action figure. You finally get it. You put it on your desk and you're like, do I take it out of the box now? Do I hang it up on the wall? It's Doom. He's all about the chase. He really doesn't want to deal with the bureaucracy of ruling the world. He doesn't really want to deal with the actual goings on of it. He just wants the challenge. And one of the things that you missed on your 10-cent synopsis, JA, is Magneto comes in because he's already won. Like, Doom has already won by the time Magneto shows up. And what does he do? He says, well, I need another challenge. So Magneto, try to beat me. Try to beat me. And so that's what he does. Like, he ends up, like, again, ruining his own plans just because Doom's got to be Doom. And I think that's fascinating about Doom as a character.
What I also did mention is, like, every fifth panel, he's just showing off why he's better than Reed Richards.
so much. So.
Yeah. I mean, you get that as far back as his first appearance. Hey, Reed, come on over. Take a look at my time machine. Isn't it super cool? Wouldn't you like to go back to Blackbeard? Isn't that super cool? And it's just showing off. But Gordan, you teach leadership and things like that. What's your take of Dr. Doom in these particular issues? Like, do you agree that he's just in it for the chase?
It's kind of interesting because there is a whole discussion when he helps Namor's people to be saved. Stopping a subplot from a previous run of comics, Fixing Atlantis, where he's like, I thought me and Namor were the same, but he draws on his people loving him while I, live by, the fear of my people and all this, which is kind of an interesting way to kind of think of Doom. He's not in it for the relationship. He's in it for kind of this sense of accomplishment, right? This treadmill of it. And so he's kind of a bad leader because he doesn't resolve anything, right? He's just like, if I win, it's not worth it. I need more. And it's interesting in this, Reed Richards is not around in any of these, but Reed Richards is talked about all the time. It's very convenient. Fantastic Four is out of town because I think Doom might have liked his victory a little more if, Reed was there. He was making the Fantastic Four bow. But when it's just, generically people of the whole world, he has control. It's just not enough, right? It doesn't fit his needs. And so, yeah, Doom's a very interesting character in terms of leadership because he's very skilled. He's got a lot of talent. He's got charisma, but his goals don't really work very well with others. And he doesn't have a clear, like, end point of what's going to make Doom happy, right? I don't know. There isn't anything. Like, I think if he killed Reed Richards, he'd find another Reed Richards. He needs something, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Last year, one of the best Doom comic books I ever read came out. It was the one that was written by Jonathan Hickman with Sanford Greene art, right? And that whole story is about Doom's rescued in space by Valeria. He has to put together this armor to fight this Galactus that's gone crazy. And the whole issue ends with the beginning of the fight with Galactus. And I think that's, like, again, the whole crux of what we like about Doom. If we're reading, if you do like the character, you don't want to see him fight Galactus. You don't want to see him win. You just want to see the chase. You want to see him, go through the steps of what he's going to do to get to that point where he might be victorious. He might be defeated, but we like the process. We like the change. We like him getting to that point. We don't really care what the outcome is, and I don't think Doom cares either. You know what I mean? Chad, what do you think? I mean, you're sometimes a Doom fan. Like, what was your take on him in this?
Anytime I get Doom playing chess with the chess pieces made out of the superheroes, I'm for it, man. Doom, all these things you guys are saying, you're disparaging the name of Doom. People love Doom. They love Doom. They think they're going to overthrow Doom, and then they realize, I can't overthrow Doom. No, I thought as far as stories go, these are a lot wordier than what we're used to. Like going back to these Bronze Age books, it took me a minute to dive back in, but man, like some of my favorite books are those Spider-Man books from the 70s. You get all the different crazy actions. You get the, I've been shrunk down. Everyone's just controlled by this gas I've been leaking out into the earth. Like, it's super wide swings from one issue to the other. And then you get the interplay, and they're wrapping up stuff from the Namor book where all the Atlanteans had been put in suspended motion or whatever it was. And then there's the Red Skull and Nazis, and then Namor's like, I don't know if I can team up with the Nazis.
I love that they always say, well, this happened back in this issue, and they make reference to an issue from 1943.
That's it. I mean, there are giant snakes. There's
no, not giant snakes, normal sized snakes, but little people.
Before the typhoons, and like they're going into space, they're going into sea, they're going into Latveria, they're all over the world, the planet, everything else. This is just comics at their finest, where it's just one crazy idea after another. And then you have the twist that it's supervillains. Like, late 70s, Namor was the big draw, and they're like, we need Namor and more books. So they put him in, they pair him with Dr. Doom against the Red Skull. Like, how cool is that? And then you have Captain America in the Shroud, like, hanging out, slumming it. Like, there's just so much fun going on here. I don't know if I made sense of a lot of it, but I didn't need to. You just turn your brain off at the door, and you have fun with it.
You know, I read as a kid and even didn't know these characters that well. But like now, being older and just that continuity thing is just, I love seeing that stuff where you've got the note, somebody said Namor shouldn't be Atlantis based. And there's a mention in there of Reed Richards fixed his issue by making him wear some weird suit. But somebody was like, that suit was stupid. So Doom fixed it, right? And I just love stuff.
You know what? I think Reed did it on purpose. For how much Namor with Sue, he's like, I could probably fix this. How do I make Namor look dumb? Make him look wear that suit. There you go. And then Doom's like, you know what? You didn't have to wear the suit. Yeah. That was Reed wanting to. But no, you're absolutely right. There's some great continuity just in the single issues with Magneto. I was wondering whether or not J.A. was going to bring up the fact that, here it is, Magneto goes to the Avengers, and who does he almost instinctually save from that group? His fellow mutant. Even Scarlet Witch is there, but he doesn't care. He saves the Beast. And he's like, the Beast is going to be my dude. Because, again, that's that X-Men connection. And
this was also before Scarlet Witch was his daughter, so...
Yeah. And you're underselling the best moment whenever Doom sees him. He's like, I'm glad to see you're not a baby anymore. And Magneto's like, how did you know that?
But then he goes and he gets other X-Men. He gets the Angel and Iceman, which, again, the Champions was just a hodgepodge of characters they didn't know what to do with. And so they just threw them all on one team and was just like, put the book out. It's fine. But
the Champions is Marvel's equivalent of a loaf of Wonder Bread.
Like two Avengers and two X-Men, and then a hot single hero and Ghost Rider during the era, and let's go. That's basically it.
There you go. Black Widow's in charge. Poor Bobby Drake has a hard time listening.
Barking out the orders to Hercules, go punch that or do whatever. It works. The team works, and actually it's not a bad run of issues. So I'm glad that they included this Champion 16 in the run, because it made me want to go back and read other Champions issues, because this wasn't terrible. John Byrne was the artist on some of those issues, and John Byrne was also co-plotting some of them with Bill Mantlo. And that was one of the questions I had for J.A. We read a Bill Mantlo story last year with the run of ROM, right? Both you and Chad were a little bit critical of that run, even though I loved it and adored it. Is Bill Mantlo's writing on this
You still get a lot of exposition where it's speaking to the action that's being drawn on the page. So it's very wordy. As you said, the great thing about Bronze Age comics, there's lots of words. You don't have to read half of them, and you get the same story.
You do. You don't have to read very many of the words. You can skim, whatever. Anyways, Chad, your take on Bill Mantlo in this? I mean, we read also Contest of Champions last week, which was also Bill Mantlo. Like,
once again, this harkens back to that time. If you don't read all the words, you're going to miss that mildly offensive Jimmy Carter accent. There's all kinds of fun to be had in here. Is this something that I would love to read every week? I would not do the Bill Mantlo Comic Shop podcast because it would grate on me. But every now and again, it's fun just to dive back in and just enjoy it for what it is. And Gordon, you mentioned about how as an adult, you can appreciate the continuity of all of these different plots intertwining. And for me, I think it's almost the opposite. Like, they do such a good job of just establishing who these characters are in these stories. You don't need to know that over in the Namor book that all the Atlanteans are in suspended animation, because they tell you. They give you everything you need, and the characterization of the characters is so spot on and just so, I don't know. It's so fun watching the bad guys be noble and still bad. You asked me about the Bill Mantlo writing. It is what it is, and what it is isn't always a bad thing. I told you, I loved Rom. My take on it was a little bit different.
we hope that you go back and listen to that. I'm not gonna say it here, but go back and listen to our Rom the Space Knight. You can hear Chad's take on what's going on with Rom.
I will say, for me, seeing Bill Mantlo wrote this, I was like, oh crap.
Uh-oh. Are you not a Mantlo guy, Gordon?
I've read of Mantlo is not good overall. There's some like Avengers issues of the 200s where I'm like, oh, this is horrible, horrible writing. Whenever I see like an issue that I randomly pick up and I see Mantlo, I'm like, maybe read something else overall. Like, I haven't read Rom. I know people love Rom, so maybe he's great there. Although it seems like some people here don't agree necessarily.
They don't pick up the nuances of Rom, and they did get sucked in. That is the great thing about Bill Mantlo writing. I do feel like he has a lot of the same soap opera beats that folks like Chris Claremont has, where like he wants you to pick up that next issue. These are random stories, right? Like, these are random issues, a lot of random events that J.A. brought up, but it made you want to read what was going to happen next. You were like, oh, wait a second. Red Skull's going into space? What's going on there? Oh, wait, they're going to go underwater? Oh, what's going on with the champions? Like, he does hook you to make you want to read the next book and pick up books that you weren't even, like, you were reading Supervillain Team Up. He's going to make you pick up the champions. Like, that's...
Well, I think with, some writers, it's like you need the right niche. And I think these, like, over-the-top villains doing this, Bill Mantlo and how he does it works in this stuff. It's not the greatest things that ever come out of the 70s or anything, but it kind of works for the ridiculous of it. I've actually had this recently, with a different author that I always thought kind of sucked overall, like Bob Haney, where I've read Bob Haney stuff on the Titans and stuff, and I'm just like, this guy sucks. I don't like any of his work. He doesn't follow continuity well. But then I started reading Brave and the Bold from the era. Brave and the Bold is completely insane, and, you'll just have Batman dissing Commissioner Gordan or being forced into retirement abruptly by a mayor you've never heard of before. Like Gotham City's like, we're going to make Commissioner Gordan retire. Batman's first thought, yeah, he was getting pretty old. Next panel, the mayor comes in and says, hey, Batman, we decided you're over the hill too. The Metal Men are in charge. They're robots, man. They're perfect. Okay, I guess I'm retired now. Does that make sense in continuity? Would the entire internet hate that right now if that happened in a book and say it's horrible? Yes. Is it hilarious in the context? Yes. It is really enjoyable of just craziness. And so I think this book, Doom is a heightened presence. Red Skull is. Namor's about as dramatic as you can get. And so I think it works. If we're worried about tight continuity, doesn't quite work. And I still think Haney's even crazier in terms of breaking continuity. But this is what I want to read from Mantlo. So if you told me a book is going to be like this, I would read it versus avoid it like any other Mantlo thing in the world. So
yeah, you need to read Rom. It's on omnibuses
someday.
now. You got to read Rom. It's
be easy to do now than on
It's very easy to do. Any case, one other thing that's easy to do is continue to listen to The Last Comic Shop. We'll be right back after the commercial breaks with our ratings of these issues of Supervillain Team Up, as well as recommendations. So stay tuned for that.
Hey all, I'm Frank. Join me and my friends as we talk about all things geek. Here at Geek Freaks Podcast, we go over the weekly news of everything in geekdom, from movies to TV, video games, and comic books. We also have a growing YouTube community. Join us as we go over everything in your geek life and share in the love of geekdom.
We're all familiar with the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, and Modern Age of comics, but we can't still be in the Modern Age after almost 4 decades, can we?
We don't think so. And that's why we started the Iron Age of Comics, a critical re-evaluation of comic books from about 1985 to 2000.
On this podcast, we go beyond the chromium covers and the grim and gritty cliches, and take a deep dive into one of the most vibrant but divisive periods in comics history.
That's the Iron Age of Comics, with new episodes every first and third Wednesdays of the month. And look for us on social media, where the handle is @Iron Age of Comics.
All right, we're back with more of The Last Comic Shop, and it is now time for ratings, where we're going to be leaders among all the comic book fans, because we are going to put rating scales to other people's work. We're going to lead you into believing that we know what we're talking about by hoity-toity things like rating scales. And J.A. is the master of the rating scale. He gives us 1 out of 4 scale every single week. And what is this week's rating scale, sir?
The 1 out of 4 supervillains. I would go team-ups, but they didn't team up that much, actually. The supervillains ended up fighting each other. I guess Namor teamed up with Doom, or Doom teamed up with Namor, and Doom teamed up with Captain America, and Magneto teamed up with the Champions. But the supervillains themselves didn't do a lot of teaming up. They were actually ended up fighting each other.
No, and there's actually 2 issues that follow issue 14, which are really dark in Supervillain Team Up. I think they finish off Red Skull teaming up with Aram Zola, the dude with the face and the tummy. Any case, but they're all about like concentration camps, and it is really, really dark. And that's like the only time when they actually really team up, and you're like, wow, if they really teamed up, boy, this would be super dark, because they're bad guys. We're not supposed to root for them. War atrocities. Any case, supervillains. We're going to start off with J.A. since he gave us the rating scale. What is your rating of these issues, including the Champions?
It was fun, and we didn't really talk about the Bob Hall art that much, which I really enjoyed. I loved the layouts. It's just that classic Bronze Age, where they actually took the time to draw backgrounds, and you've got some really incredible set pieces, large one-page spreads with just every character jammed in, and so much going on in the scene. I think we went too far the other way in the 90s, where they started to strip out a lot of that context, and so you would just have some action shots or one giant panel of foot coming across. Sorry, Chad. He's a giant Liefeld fan.
It's so awkward to know at this point of the podcast.
Don't you judge me.
I wouldn't have
Don't you
appeared if I'd
judge me.
known this, honestly.
So yeah, I'd give it a 3. Some great covers, as you mentioned, by John Byrne. The writing can get a lot. There's just a lot of it, and a bit pedantic at times. But the story and the plot is irreverent. They're talking about these, things that are going to take over the world, but they never feel life-threatening or dire. It's sort of like the James Bond villain who's going to destroy the world, but it's not going to happen. James Bond will figure out a way to do it. This is the same. That Doom will stop the Red Skull, and then that someone will stop Doom, or Doom will stop himself because he just gets too bored with it. If anything, I thought the Champions issue was a little bit less appealing, and maybe it's just because I thought the Champions themselves were a bunch of, I mean, they're like second tier superheroes thrown all together. Marvel didn't know what to do with all these. Angel, by far the plainest white bread character ever, so boring. The only thing that made him interesting is when he got his wings cut off and Apocalypse turned him into a Archangel. So yeah, it's 3. It's a fun read. If you read every line, you're probably still reading it today, but if you skim, all good.
All right, Gordon, you're our guest. How many super villains are you giving this?
So for me personally, it's more like a 3.5, right? Wow. Because there's just so much nostalgia for me in this type of book, right? And it really fits in that area that I love right now is these 70s Bronze Age stuff. A lot of it I read is DC now, but I wouldn't suggest thinking in a lot of depth of like, did this all make sense? Did this come together? Why is this happening? It's very much just what comics were at some point, right? You read it, you think it's cool, you move on with your life, right? And so to me, it fits what it's supposed to do really well. So it might be the best Bill Mantlo work outside of Rom, maybe, in the world that I'm aware of at least. And man, that cover to 14 is worth 5 supervillains in my mind. So it's got to be at least a 3.5. And the covers overall are pretty cool. I do kind of agree that the Champions issue is not... Because honestly, as a kid, I read this, and then it took me 20 years before I actually read that last Champions issue, because I just found this comic in a random box. And so it certainly did not reach my expectations of how do you make this happen. We just got the Beast, we got Magneto against the whole world. Man, that's a great way to end an issue, and I don't know whether you want a resolution to that. What happens, we'll never know. You know, it's like Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, running out, you know, against impossible odds, right? You can't ever really beat that. And so the ambiguity to me is good.
Well, I'm going to go next, and I think I'm going to take an opposite take to Gordon because I'm also a Bronze Age connoisseur, but I think I'm going to be a little more snooty with this and only give it a 2.5 on this, just simply because I've read so much Bronze Age stuff, right? There's so many great things in this book that are typical of Bronze Age stories that I love, like the stakes, to J.A.'s point, are not too serious, but just serious enough that you want to keep reading. The characterization is really good. It's melodramatic. There's a lot of great continuity nods. I love in the one issue where they go underwater in Namor and somebody brings out the big conch shell that they used actually in like Fantastic Four #4. Namor brought Monstro or whatever to attack New York City. Like a good sense of continuity here, which is great. But at the end of the day, like, can I compare this to some of the giant books in my own mind from the Bronze Age? Like, I don't know, the Jim Starlin run on Warlock. It doesn't reach those high levels. No, it's a fun read. But it's not the best of the Bronze Age. It's really fairly average Bronze Age, which is still, if I'm comparing it to other comic books, it's like a 3.5. But like for other Bronze Age stuff, compared to Steve Gerber's Howard the Duck and certain Defenders issues I really, really like, and even Amazing Spider-Man from this era, like everything that Jerry Conway was doing in that book, like, that stuff's the best for me. And so I'm going to give it a 2.5. Not to say anybody shouldn't read it. I'm just being a snob. I like some other Bronze Age books more, like Rom. I love Rom. Or Micronauts. I love Micronauts. Like, so much good stuff out there. Chad.
So, yeah, I'm of two minds because I did genuinely enjoy this. And I think part of it for me is this Bronze Age. These are the last of my favorite Marvel comics before we get into the 80s. And you get that Jim Shooter influence where, like, a lot of the frenetic energy gets sucked out and it becomes too much about the continuity and it becomes too much about these different references. And, like, I don't know. By the time we get into the mid-80s Marvel stuff, unless it's, like, the great books like your Thors or your Daredevils, a lot of the rest of Marvel is just, it gets a little bit blah for me. But these late 70s books, Gordon alluded to this, the pace of this, like you're in the ocean, bam, you're in the space, bam, there's this plot going on, bam, there's so many things coming at you from every different angle, and sure, the exposition is there, but the nice part is you're never lost. You know, sure, the character relationships are there, and they're queuing into those old continuity things, But do you need to know that's that horn that Namor used in Fantastic Four #4? No, you don't. But if you do, that's awesome. Like, this is the best of that before so many of those forces just become more overwhelming. And, like, I don't know, you still have characters meeting for, like, the first or second time here in these books. And I just go back to Magneto being so upset. Like, how did you know I was a baby? Everybody knows I was a baby. It was all still fun, and there's that element of joy to it. But with that said, I go back to like the Spider-Man issues of the 70s. I think are so much better, but that's because I have a hero to root for there. I think these, for what they are, they're just turn your brain off at the door, enjoy it. Jay's right. We didn't praise the Bob Hall and Don Perlin art enough, and I know in the past I've been critical. I'm like, some of their later stuff I did find to become a little bit more boring, but like, this was pretty good, pretty good. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to give it a 2.95. I feel like when you get to the 3, you're getting to like the best of the best stuff, like the really good comics. I think these are emblematic for what they are in their time period, but that time period was friggin' awesome. So 2.95.
Attaboy. Sam Bronze Age is freaking awesome. You're damn right. You're damn right. And you know what? One thing that you should also get right is all of our recommendations. Again, these are books that you can pick up at your local comic book shop in addition to these issues of Supervillain Team Up, if you can find them. I mean, I think I bought issue 10 for, I don't know, $6 or $7 at my local comic book shop. And you can find some of these fairly cheap, but yeah, or you can get them in a lot of collections, which will go hand in hand with my recommendation in just a second. But we're going to go ahead and start off with J.A. Scott. J.A., what do we got for your recommendations from you, sir?
Okay, I'm going to recommend a single issue that came out last year as part of the Blood Hunt ongoing series that we actually covered over Halloween last year. And this is Blood Hunters issue 3. So this has 3 standalone stories in it. The first one, the reason why I'm recommending it, is a Doctor Doom story. Ooh. Where what I love about it, it's not really about Doctor Doom, but it's about the Latverian embassy in Alberia, not Albania, Alberia, is being overrun by vampires. And there is a person that works in the embassy. She's a proud Latverian. She cherishes the land and the people and the traditions, but she hates Doom. She thinks he's a tyrant. So she's while she works at the embassy, she's trying to overthrow Doom in the background. And long story short, throughout this short story, you've got the vampires are going closer and closer and encroaching on the embassy, and then when it looks like she's about to be killed by a vampire, Doom shows up and saves her and kills all the vampires. And she asks her, like, why? How did you know? How did you save me? How did you know? And he goes, I know who you are, and I know that you are a traitor, but you are also Latverian, and to be Latverian is to be special. So he saves her and then takes her back to Latveria, where because of Doom, no vampires are coming in, and she realizes that maybe Doom might not be good, but he is the answer to these times. So that's the first of these small stories, and it's just classic Doom stuff. The next one, The Fall of the House of Udder, Udder, is great because it features a story with Hellcow.
Oh, man.
And then the last one, Once More Into the Darkness, is a nice little tale with Dagger, Elsa Bloodstone, and my favorite, White Widow, showing up to get through the night while all these vampires are raging. And so each story is written by a bunch of different people, but it's Blood Hunters issue 3, which I'm sure you can find maybe in book bins even now. I don't know, maybe not in book bins, but I'm sure you can find it in the back issue racks of your local comic book shop.
Well, there you go. All right, Chad, what do you got for us?
So I'm going to go a little pricey, which is ironic because I think, I don't know if I brought up where Gordan and I, we met on the internet, and we have bonded over our mutual love of discounted comic books and comic book trades. Finding some of those bargains out there. So Gordan knows I'm not the type of guy that goes out and spends a lot of scratch on these omnibus collections because I'm too busy getting these $5 deals and $10 deals all over the place here. But the omnibus I'm going to recommend is the Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus number 5. When it comes to omnibus, I try to get like the best of the best, and number 5 is the end of my Spider-Man Omnibus collection until I get to the Michelini-McFarlane ones. But this is that 1970s era of Spider-Man. These are the ones where you're getting such wacky stories from people like Marv Wolfman and Ross Andrew. Len Wein wrote a ton of these too. You're getting people like Rocket Racer. You're getting Stegron. You're getting Grizzly. You're getting Will-O-the-Wisp. Just so many of these classic, fun Spider-Man stories that have that frenetic energy while they're still moving the soap opera forward. And while no one is going to stop and talk about how awesome it was that time that Harry Osborn's therapist became the Green Goblin. It's awesome, and it's in that era. It's just indicative. Reading these the supervillain team-ups brought me back to those late 70s Spidey books, and it's like, man, it was the closing out of an era for me, like the last best thing for Marvel until we get to the 90s and they bring in Rob Liefeld, and we lose all the feet, but everything is extreme and wonderful. But Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus 5, that's my pick for this week.
All right. Well, I'll go next with another omnibus, which again goes back to the books that we read today. If you're interested in reading some of these issues of Supervillain Team Up or the Champions and you don't want to find them in single issues, you can get the omnibus called Dr. Doom, The Book of Doom, which has that awesome variant cover from a Supervillain Team Up issue 14 of Dr. Doom standing triumphant over so many members of both the Avengers and the X-Men and the Marvel Universe. Just great stuff. But just let me tell you, this book is one of my absolute favorites in my collection, being a Dr. Doom fan. You get so many great Doctor Doom stories in addition to the ones we just covered today. You get his first appearance in issue 5. You get issue 6 where he teams up with the Submariner for the first time and they launch the Baxter building into space. That was so cool. I have that in a treasury too. It's so awesome. You get the first time he fought Spider-Man in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 5. You get his origin story in Fantastic Four annual number 2. But then it goes on from there. You get these great issues from Uncanny X-Men during the Chris Claremont run, like 146 and 147. You get Doom Quest, which he goes back in time with Iron Man. Some of the best Iron Man stories also have Dr. Doom in them. And if you were interested in that story, Emperor Doom, which again tells the story of Dr. Doom taking over all over the world by harnessing the powers of the Purple Man to take over people's minds, that's included here too. It's one of my favorite issues of all time is that graphic novel, Emperor Doom from 1987. Plus, you get the Unthinkable stories from Mark Waid and Mike Wieringo run. I can't recommend it enough. It's one of the best omnibuses you can get if you love what I consider the most complex and interesting character probably in all of comics. That's Dr. Doom. He's so super interesting. Gordan, what do you got for us to wrap things up?
Speaking of doctors.
So we talked about Marvel supervillains teaming up. I'm recommending DC villains of the 70s teaming up, the Secret Society of Supervillains. And so this book, I love it so much, of this like mid-70s craziness. Across the first 10 issues, like 5 different writers and multiple all this. It is a mess in many ways. But it also has a lot of really interesting characters from the 70s thrown together. You've got all these villains trying to work together. You've got Darkseid being in charge for a little bit. You've got Funky Flashman is one of the main characters in this. Fake Stan Lee. And it actually is a book that came in that box that I got as a kid. Issue 9 came from that. Interestingly, characters I'd never seen before and wouldn't see again for probably 20 years in many cases. But it's a really interesting way of looking at kind of DC's version of what happens when the supervillains come together in that. And it also has all this stuff of all these cool 70s things like, what did we do after Kirby's Fourth World got canceled? Well, Darkseid got to hang out, slum it with some mostly lame supervillains. What did we do when we've got Goodwin and Simonson's amazing Manhunter run, right? This thing that won awards, that was awesome. He died heroically. What happened? I'm sure we just let that character just stay dead. Oh, no. We threw him in like a C-tier book of his clone is in this book, being all Manhunter and all that. So, yeah, the original Manhunter is kind of dead, but this is basically him again. You've got Captain Comet, 50s hero, coming back, and he's the good guy to fight these villains. And you've got a bunch of other random 70s portrayals of superheroes that come in and out to fight Gorilla Grodd, Abracadabra, and all these guys. And the team seems to change every other issue with new people coming in and new plans, both ill-conceived, stupid, and unbelievable, but interesting. The first trade is only $10 on Amazon. The second trade is hilariously $4,995 on Amazon that I just looked. But the Kindle version is $10, so you can still get it. You know, if you get the non-Kindle version for $4,995, please let us know, because mad respect to you, and I don't know how it could possibly be worth that money. But if you're in that 70s vibe, I definitely recommend these books. Again, it's not going to be, honestly, as good even as Supervillain Team Up that we read today. But man, it is really interesting to see all those 70s characters piled on of like, hey, they got nothing better to do, kind of like Angel and Iceman. Let's throw them on a team and see what happens from issue to issue. So a lot of
Gordan, I got to say, I've never read any of that run, but now, man, I'm going to track it down. Because, like, you made me excited. It seems like the Legion of Doom, but, like, nobody cares, which is great. Like, I just love it. I love this guy. I want to see
and it's got some good Conway issue and a half, and a bunch of other writers thrown in and artists abruptly. So
bringing back Manhunter for no good reason. That's the best. In any case, we're hoping that you always have a good reason to come back to the Last Comic Shop, and you can make sure that you never miss any of our episodes by going out to www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, rate, reviewing, and subscribing. We are on every single podcasting platform available, as well as YouTube. So whatever you like to listen to, you can find our show every single week. We've got wonderful guests on, like Gordan, and we're so appreciative that he stopped by and shared in my love of Bronze Age comics. This has been great.
And while we might be the Last Comic Shop podcast, we don't want to be the last comic shop, so we encourage everybody to get out there and support your shops. Maybe go dig it for some of those Supervillain team-up issues. We read 10 through 14 and Champion 16. Or you could go in the back issue stacks further to look for Blood Hunters number 3, or maybe you want to go on those omnibus walls over there. Look for Amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Collection number 5 with those great 70s Spidey stories. Or the Book of Doom with that direct market Doom cover where everybody bows before Doom. But let's not forget, too, you got to go over to the DC side of the store there and look for the DC Secret Society of Supervillains Volume 1. And if you get Volume 2, let us know. It must have been printed on gold. But hopefully you enjoy all those. And then you could always check back to our particular website where they can find what this week, J.A.?
I'll always have a link to our merch store. We've got t-shirts, hats, tote bags, coffee mugs. This week, a special, if you get the rainbow colored one, it shrinks you down to 6 inches.
Just watch out for the garden snakes.
That's right. Watch out for the giant dormouses. They're not giant, though. They're small. They were tiny. Mouses weren't huge. They were tiny. Still random, though. Boy. But hey, J.A., if they're getting all these comic books, what can they use to make sure that they're saving a little bit of cash every single week?
Well, if they head over to bcwsupplies.com, they can save 10% if they use the promo code LCSPOD on checkout for boards, boxes, bags, all sorts of comic book paraphernalia to help keep your comics and trading cards in tip-top shape. So head over to bcwsupplies.com and use the promo code LCSPOD at checkout to save 10%.
All right. And Gordan, before we let you go for today, please let everybody that's listening to our show today, where can they find your tremendous work, your books on leadership?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The books, probably Amazon's the best place to find them overall, though we are on some bookstore sites and that type of thing as well. I think actually we got some copies on eBay too with some sellers. But the Marvel book is Leaders Assemble, Leadership in the MCU. And the Avatar book is called Elements of Leadership, Lessons from Avatar, The Last Airbender. Look for us on X or LinkedIn or talentmetrics.io if you want to read some of our other writings on this. So thanks so much.
Okay. And until next week, I was the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Chad Smith and J.A. Scott, as well as the wonderful Dr. Gordan Schmidt. And we hope that you stay safe, stay warm, because it's the wintertime. And that's what I always recommend. And remember, if you ever see a football coach go into a bank, don't worry. He's just going to get his quarterback.
Yeah.
My daughter told me that joke.
Just got to teach her about the Aldi shopping carts.
Comic Shop Podcast was a 2025 Black Angus production.